I screwed up big time today and may have ruined my relationship with my family. I may have just destroyed my relationship with my long-lost sister and possibly the rest of my family. I don't know if I'm here to vent or to ask for advice, but I, 31F, can't shake the feeling that I've just set fire to the fragile bridge I spent years building with my sister, and now I might have burned it beyond repair. My parents were college sweethearts, the kind of couple that seemed destined to be together. But when they turned 25, my father had what I can only describe as a quarter-life crisis. He cheated on my mom with a co-worker, and that affair resulted in my older sister, Ashley. Instead of facing the consequences, my father, who came from money and had a trust fund to fall back on, chose the easy way out. He paid off the other woman and buried the truth. My mother had no idea. By the time I was 8, my parents' marriage had crumbled, and they divorced. At the time, I didn't understand why, but years later, I learned the real reason. My mom had struggled with infertility after having me, and when she finally decided to try IVF, she discovered that my father had been secretly sending money to another woman all along. That was how she learned about Ashley. Unlike my father, my mother wanted to help Ashley in any way she could, but he refused to acknowledge her. Finding out about all of this completely shattered my perception of my dad. Growing up, I had been a daddy's girl. He was my favorite person, my hero. In my eyes, he could do no wrong. And then, in an instant, the illusion was gone. He wasn't the man I thought he was, and it broke me. Years later, fate played a cruel joke on me. Ashley's husband, John, took a job at my father's law firm. Neither he nor my father knew at first that they were connected through her until they accidentally ran into each other at a company charity event. They kept their distance at first, but after serious health issues, my father decided it was time to establish a relationship with his daughter. That's when my parents told me about Ashley. She met the news coldly, and I can't blame her. Over the past few years, we've slowly built up a rapport. We haven't become sisters in the full sense of the word, but we've slowly grown closer as friends. She has only a superficial relationship with her father, but she allows him to be involved in her children's lives. But the thing that surprised me the most was another thing. Ashley has become incredibly close to my mom. Her kids call my mom Grandma, and they see each other at least once a week. I don't know all the details, but from what I understand, Ashley had a difficult childhood. Her own mother always put men before her daughter. My mom, being an incredibly kind person, filled that void. I recently got a job as an accountant at my father's firm. It was harder than I expected to fit in. My status as daughter of the boss put an invisible wall between me and my co-workers. The only person who was truly friends with me was John. He used to invite me to lunches and after-work get-togethers, not alone, but in the company of other employees. But then I found out that there were events that I wasn't invited to. When I asked John what was going on, he admitted that Ashley had heard rumors about him spending time with a young woman at work. No one in the office knew about our family ties, so the situation seemed ambiguous. Ashley told John that she was uncomfortable with his interactions with me. He apologized to me, but said he had to think of her feelings and family first. I completely lost control of the situation. The past few months have been absolute hell. I broke up with my long-term boyfriend, and since we worked together, he made my life miserable until I had no choice but to quit. I never wanted to work for my dad, but at that moment, it was the only option I had. Just when I thought I was finally finding my place in the office, I realized that at least one, maybe more, of my co-workers believed I was some kind of homewrecker. The rumors crushed me. That night, drowning in frustration and self-pity, I got wasted. And in that drunken spiral, I did something unforgivable. I called Ashley. I barely remember the conversation, but one thing still echoes in my head. I told her, "At least I'm not a homewrecker like your mom." Yeah, I fucked up. The next morning, my dad called. Ashley had cut him off, again. She wanted nothing to do with him. When I explained what happened, I expected anger or disappointment, but what I got was worse. He told me Ashley and John were right to distance themselves, even if they believed in something untrue. According to him, it's all about optics. That was the last straw. The hypocrisy was too much. He had the nerve to talk about appearances when he was the one who had an affair. Desperate, I called my mom only to find out Ashley had cut her off too. She was devastated. And me? I just felt like I had no one left. I know I need to apologize. I know I crossed a line. But right now, I feel completely alone. Where do I even go from here? Wow, this is one of those situations where emotions got the best of everyone. Do you think Ashley was justified in cutting ties, or was it an overreaction? And what about the dad? Should he have stood up for OP, or did he handle it right? Let me know what you think in the comments, and sometimes the only way not to lose is not to gamble at all. I screwed up big time today, losing my entire life savings of over $600,000 due to my rapidly developing gambling addiction and inability to pay the taxes I now owe. This might be a long story, but I want to lay it all out. The way my life was before the downward spiral into chaos, and where I stand now. At one point, I, 38M, had built up a retirement account worth over $500,000, along with more than $100,000 in liquid cash sitting comfortably in my checking account. Some of you might wonder how I got to that level of financial security, so let me start with a bit of background. I'm an IT professional with a strong foundation in software engineering. Though these days I work in management, I've been making six figures since my late 20s, but I've never been the flashy type. I save significantly more than the average person, avoid unnecessary luxuries, and prefer to invest in quality where it matters rather than indulging in excess. I've always lived with a sense of financial responsibility, never worried about losing my job for a year, let alone struggling to put food on the table. If things ever took a turn for the worse, I knew I had enough savings to sustain myself for years. Gambling was never a major part of my life, but I did enjoy the occasional trip to the casino, probably more than my friends did. It was a hobby, nothing more. That is, until mid-last year. I was always a casual gambler, sticking mostly to parlor table games, but on one particular night, everything changed. I walked into the casino with $600, took a seat at an Ultimate Texas Hold'em table, and something incredible happened. I couldn't lose. For hours, my winning streak continued, and as my confidence grew, so did my bets. I kept raising, pushing the limits, until I found myself consistently betting the table maximum, $3,000 spread across various bets. The energy at the table was electric. The dealer was on a losing streak, which meant everyone was winning, but I was winning the most. My stack kept growing, and soon I had the entire table cheering me on. That was the moment everything shifted. A straight followed by a full house, then another straight, then another full house. It was unreal. I was playing max bets, raising 4x blind, not even looking at my cards, and still winning. Sometimes I'd take the hand with nothing but a high card. I could not lose. The energy at the table was electric. Every time I won another $2,000, I'd toss $100 chips to the other players, just for the fun of it. The largest chips they had were 500s, and they kept running out. 6 times they had to restock the table because I was clearing them out. To avoid drawing too much attention, I stuffed stacks of $500 chips into my pockets, leaving just enough on the table to keep playing. Any new winnings? Straight into my pockets, out of sight. At one point, the casino decided to change the cards, a process that takes about 20 minutes. I stood up to stretch my legs and head to the restroom, and that's when I realized just how much I had won. My pockets were so stuffed with chips that my pants were sagging under the weight. I was actually worried they might spill out while I walked. Later, I found out that security had been watching me closely. The pit bosses were getting calls, telling them to keep an eye on me. Apparently, they were suspicious, wondering if I was somehow cheating. They even reviewed the footage for days, trying to figure out how the hell I was winning so much. When I finally cashed out, I had turned my initial $600 buy-in into over $30,000. It was an insane rush. I could buy a car, I could buy anything I wanted. But then it hit me. I already could. The money itself didn't matter. It was the high that got me. A few days later, I learned that my status in the casino had skyrocketed. I had been bumped to the highest tier, unlocking a flood of VIP perks, free luxury cruises, private golf outings, and over $3,000 in dining comps that covered even the high-end steakhouse. Eventually, I used those comps to treat my friends to multiple lavish dinners, and with nothing specific to spend the money on, I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I went back the following weekend. This time, I mixed it up, playing slots and other table games, and somehow I kept winning. The streak didn't stop. Slots were lighting up with hand pays left and right. People at the casino recognized me from last time and wanted to hear the story. Over the course of the month, I racked up another $20,000, mostly from slot machines, betting anywhere from $5 to $60 per spin. At that point, I had nearly $50,000 in cash just sitting in my closet. Stacks of $10,000 bundles with no real purpose. It wasn't savings, it wasn't for bills, it was just waiting to be used for another trip to the casino. My friends loved telling the story of my insane winning streak. It was the kind of tale that made people dream. One guy walking into a casino with a few $100 and walking out with a fortune. Everyone likes a good beating the house story, and for a while, I was the main character. They all knew I had nearly $50,000 in cash stashed away. I had just bought a house and started fixing it up. New paint, appliances, flooring, all the upgrades. I spent about $40,000 on renovations, but I was careful. I used my card for everything, making sure to keep my casino cash untouched, setting it aside for future trips. And then, slowly but surely, that money started to disappear. What was once $50K turned into $40K, then $35K. Every time I lost, I told myself, no big deal, just a small setback. But then, a new thought crept in. If my friends ever asked to see the cash, what am I going to say? I needed an excuse, or better yet, I needed to win it back. Of course, I know just as well as you do now, that was a ridiculously stupid idea. But at the time, it made perfect sense. Then my mom came to visit. She lives in a state without casinos, so for her, gambling is a rare treat. She kept talking about how excited she was to see me in action. The lucky one, the guy who never loses. I had to lie. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, that I had already lost a big chunk of my winnings, that I wasn't some gambling genius who cracked the system, that I had just been lucky and that luck was already running out. So I made up an excuse. Something simple, something that wouldn't make me sound like an idiot. But the moment I said it, I felt sick. Lying about losing $15K might not seem like a big deal to some people, but to me, it was humiliating. And that moment, the shame, the cover-up, that was the beginning of the real downfall. After my mom left, something changed. I had no one left to keep me accountable, no one checking in on how much I had won or lost. The casino was still treating me like a VIP, giving me $250 in free play twice a week. It seemed like free money, so of course I went back, just to collect the free play. But free play doesn't last long when you're betting $10 to $50 a spin. Sometimes it was gone in minutes, sometimes in seconds, and when it ran out, I'd walk straight to the cashier and withdraw $3,000 at a time, more than the ATM would even allow. At this point, I wasn't gambling for fun anymore. I was chasing something, trying to recapture that high, trying to undo the damage, but I was already past the point of no return. The losses kept piling up. Week after week, I was hemorrhaging money. $3,000 gone, then $10,000, then more. One day I opened my banking app and saw a notification that made my stomach drop. You've spent $30,000 less this month than last month. That should have been a wake-up call. But instead of stopping, my mind twisted it into something else. I just need one big win, one good day at the tables, and I can get back $20,000, maybe $30,000. Then I'll stop. Then I'll cut my losses. This was the lie I told myself over and over as I spiraled deeper into the hole. Eventually, I stopped going to the casino altogether. Not because I had found the strength to quit. No, the allure had just faded. I needed something new. That's when I discovered online casinos. At first, I thought they were all illegal or blocked for US players, but I was wrong. I found one that accepted my bank transfers with no issues. I deposited a few $100 and started playing slots and table games from the comfort of my bed. It was too easy. Way too easy. I lost my entire savings account before I even realized what was happening. But by then, I didn't care. I felt empty. And when you feel nothing, it becomes dangerously easy to justify anything. Well, fuck it. What's another $10,000 at this point? I tested my credit card to see if it would work. It did. I maxed it out, then asked for a limit increase. That got approved too. I maxed it out again. When I ran out of credit, I turned to my Roth IRA. The first time I wired money to my personal account. The transfer took less than 20 minutes. I felt an instant rush, guilt, anxiety, and thrill, all mixing together in a way that made my hands shake. That money was supposed to be for my future. Instead, I deposited it straight into the online casino and lost $10,000 in hours. At that point, I started making smaller deposits, $1,000 at a time. That felt reasonable, less reckless, less destructive. But within minutes, it would be gone and I'd deposit again. Just another 1,000, then another, then another. When my bills came due, I had nothing left. No cash, no savings. So I pulled from my retirement again. This time I told myself it was just to cover expenses. I needed this money. But every time I withdrew more than I needed, and every time I gambled the rest away. The worst part? It wasn't all losses. There were moments, brief, intoxicating moments, where I'd turn $100 into $20,000 or $1,000 into $10,000. Those wins kept me chasing, kept me hooked. If I could turn $100 into $20,000 once, just imagine what I could do with $1,000. I could win it all back. I would win it all back. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I kept pulling money from my retirement account, telling myself just this one last time, until there was barely anything left. I had withdrawn so much that the remaining amount wasn't even enough to cover the taxes and penalties I now owed for early withdrawals. The realization hit me like a freight train. Not only was my savings gone, but I had also created a massive financial burden that I couldn't escape. And yet, I still told no one. I was drowning in shame. My closest friends were all still wealthy, living the same comfortable lives we had always known. But I was sinking. It became harder and harder to keep up the facade. Going out to eat, golfing, casual weekend trips, things that used to be effortless, now felt like impossible expenses. My new house didn't even have basic furniture. No big sofa, no proper dining table. At first I had excuses. I just moved in. I'm still settling. But over time it became clear. I wasn't buying furniture because I couldn't afford it. I started avoiding invitations, avoiding conversations, avoiding my own reflection in the mirror. The anxiety was crushing, but what finally broke me was the looming tax bill. The debt wasn't just an abstract number anymore. It was real, and I had no way to cover it. I had no choice but to come clean. I told my best friend everything, the entire humiliating, gut-wrenching truth. The gambling, the losses, the debt, how I had burned through my retirement savings in a matter of months. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had, and the only thing I regret is not having it sooner. Looking back, I feel like I was living in a fog, a deep, depressive haze where nothing seemed real. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't feeling clearly. I didn't care about my own well-being. I was just chasing the next win, convincing myself I could still fix everything. It all happened so fast. Now I've stopped gambling entirely. I've forced myself to face reality. I've set a budget, a plan to cover my taxes, a path forward. But the damage is done. The fallout from this will follow me for years, maybe even for the rest of my life. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't gamble at all. Because sometimes, winning is the worst thing that can happen to you. The author's story is a tragic example of how winning can be the beginning of disaster. There is no classic image of an irresponsible gambler who burns money without thinking. On the contrary, he was reasonable, successful, able to manage finances, and did not even feel the need for money. But gambling is not just betting. It is an emotion that can consume even the most rational people. The first big win gave the illusion of control. That feeling of omnipotence when it seems that fortune is on your side, that you can play by your own rules. But the reality is this: the casino always wins in the long run, and the more you convince yourself that you can outplay the system, the more trapped you become. The worst part is not the loss of money, but the destruction of the psyche. Each loss only encouraged him to keep going. Gradually, the real world lost its meaning, and the casino, physical or online, became the only place where you could feel that adrenaline again. But the biggest mistake was silence. Fear of judgment and shame made the situation worse. If he had confessed the problem earlier, maybe things would have ended differently. But in stories like this, one more chance always seems to be the last, until there is nothing left. This story is not just a warning about the risks of gambling. It's a reminder of how easily a person can find themselves in a situation where their life is ruined because of one wrong idea. I can get it all back. And sometimes the only way not to lose is not to gamble at all. 3 story. You all wanted another crazy story, so here it is. This time it involves an animal, and while the situation was horrific, I want to preface this by saying that everything turned out fine. Our dog is alive and well. We took our Catahoula mix, Rocky, to the vet on a Thursday for a routine snip and chip. We knew that neutering could be rough on larger dogs. He weighed 85 lbs, but we decided to go through with it anyway. We dropped him off in the morning and picked him up later that afternoon. Everything seemed fine at first. He had some post-op swelling, a hematoma about the size of a golf ball where his testicles used to be, but the vet assured us it was normal. They told us to ice the area for 30-40 minutes every few hours, and it should go down on its own. So we followed instructions, iced it all weekend, but instead of getting smaller, the hematoma kept growing. A lot. By Monday, it was the size of a grapefruit. Alarmed, we rushed him back to the vet. They examined him and reassured us again. Yes, the swelling was a bit unusual, but still technically within the range of normal. Their advice? Keep alternating ice packs and warm compresses on the incision site, and that's where I really messed up. I should have pushed back. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. We continued icing him throughout the week, but things only got worse. The swelling didn't improve. In fact, it blackened. The skin started cracking and peeling, and some areas looked so raw that it seemed like it could burst at any moment. Then Friday morning came. I couldn't sleep. Around 4:30 a.m., I moved to the couch, hoping to doze off. Not long after, I heard Rocky scratching at his collar. Nothing unusual. But then he made a strange noise, like a mix between a whine and a low grunt. I listened closely. He was pacing around in the laundry room. I figured he just needed to go outside to pee. Since he couldn't use the dog door with the cone of shame on, I got up to let him out. I stepped into the room and froze. Blood. Everywhere. I flipped on the light and was met with something straight out of a horror movie. Walls, floor, carpet, his bed, all of it, covered in blood. My heart stopped. I panicked, rushed Rocky outside, then sprinted back to throw on whatever clothes I could find. Grabbing a pile of rags, I ran back out to assess the damage. It looked like a few of his stitches had ripped open. My first thought was that if I could just apply enough pressure, the bleeding would stop. I immediately called the emergency vet line. Fax tone. What the hell? I tried another number I found online. No answer. I kept calling. Over and over. Nothing. So, I just lay there in the yard with him. For 40 minutes. Both of us freezing in the early Pacific Northwest spring air. And things were only about to get worse. My son, 6 at the time, woke up around 6 a.m. and sees the laundry room light on. He looked in the room and saw what I had seen minus the dog. He noticed the back porch light is also on, so he looked out the porch door to see Rocky and me laying in the yard with blood on us, and he assumed we are both dead. He slowly and quietly opened the door and asks if I'm okay. I told him what had happened and that everything was fine and to go back to bed. I thought I could handle this still. He goes back to his room. Around 7 a.m. I am officially freezing, and the blood doesn't appear to be stopping when I took pressure off of it. I figured we need to get back in the house. I took the rag off and got us both back into the laundry room, where we re-established pressure on the wound on the tile floor. My wife had a lot to do that day, and was in her 3rd trimester with kid number 3. We will call him Groot from part 1 of the saga, so I didn't want to wake her up. I sent her a message saying I could use a hand when she gets up. A half hour later, my son woke back up and comes to check on the dog and me. I walked him through cleaning procedures to try to make the scene a little less fighting for mom and sister. He is a champ and got almost all of it cleaned up. I had him switch me out and apply pressure on the wound while I get feeling back in my legs. I finished up cleaning the room and called the local vet who did the procedure right as they opened. Doctor will be at the office in 30 min, I am told. They are about 2 blocks from our house. My wife wakes up, my son and I fill her in on the morning so far, and we got the whole family into the car and to the vet. I ran them through my morning and they took Rocky in the back and started to work. I got a call around 4 p.m. that day saying everything went well. They had to put him under, cut off his scrotal sac hematoma, cauterize some stuff, and stitch him back up. I spent the week sleeping on the couch where I could hear him and panicked every time he moved. It was a long week. I think I will go with the first time I nearly gave myself a vasectomy for our next adventure. It involves a 4-wheeler and getting to see my femoral artery. This story is a living reminder of how important it is to trust your intuition, especially when it comes to the health of loved ones, whether they are people or animals. The hero tried his best to help his pet, even when the veterinarian assured him that everything was fine. This is a classic case when it was worth insisting on additional checks rather than relying on the assurances of doctors. Doctor errors, underestimation of symptoms, and lack of emergency care are common problems faced by pet owners. Unfortunately, because of this, pets suffer longer than they should. In this situation, the author was in a terrible position, and the way he fought for his dog is something to be respected. And the moral here is simple. If you feel like something is wrong, fight for your loved ones. Be persistent, demand exams, consult with other specialists. And yes, if something seems a little odd, it's better to be overinsured than to have an injured pet in bloody chaos on the floor later. Have you ever experienced a similar situation where the doctor underestimated the problem? Share your stories in the comments. I screwed up big time today with a car accident. It didn't happen today, but on Super Bowl Sunday, a date I'm sure will haunt me for years to come. I was on my way to a friend's apartment for a Super Bowl party. After a restless night, I had spent the morning tossing and turning, leaving myself little time to get ready. I rushed through a quick shower and to save time decided to grab food on the way. I placed my order, jumped in my car, and left. The route was second nature to me, so I didn't bother with directions. I'm also the kind of person who doesn't always play music while driving, and that day the silence felt preferable to any noise. It was a peaceful, sunny afternoon. No distractions, no rush. And then, out of nowhere, a car slammed into my back tire, sending me spinning out of the intersection. The impact was so sudden that for a split second, I genuinely thought I was dreaming. The sound was horrific. The deep, grinding crunch of metal, the screech of tires struggling against asphalt. My car spun a full 270 degrees before coming to a violent stop, partially on the sidewalk. I sat there, frozen, my trunk jammed against a street sign, my front wheels obstructing an entire lane of traffic. The world around me blurred as I tried to process what had just happened. Then, reality hit. I had seen the car on my right, just briefly in my peripheral vision. I had assumed they were slowing down to make a right turn after I had passed through the intersection. After all, why would they keep going if they were waiting at a red light? I remember approaching the intersection and noticing that the opposing turn lane was at a complete stop. In LA, it's common to see cars inching into the middle of intersections, waiting for a chance to turn left, so it was odd that they weren't moving. This intersection, however, had a protected left turn. I knew that because I lived in the area. The damage was brutal. My back right tire was crushed, the rim bent beneath the car, the hubcap missing entirely, the door jammed shut. I could smell gasoline leaking onto the pavement. The other vehicle was just as bad, its entire front end crumpled beyond recognition. As soon as I stepped out of my car, a girl, probably my age, early 20s, stormed up to me, demanding my license. She insisted I had run a red light. Under any other circumstances, I might have laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. My friends always call me the most cautious driver in our group. I check my mirrors constantly. I always signal at least 3 times before merging. I never even roll through stop signs, let alone run a red light. It was absurd, impossible. But I was in shock. By the time my brain caught up with my mouth, she had already walked away. The cops arrived quickly, purely by chance. They briefly questioned me and the other driver before deciding not to file a report. To me, it was obvious. A right turn on red gone terribly wrong. When I called my insurance, I confidently explained what had happened. I was driving straight on a road I knew like the back of my hand when another driver, attempting a right turn, slammed into me. I immediately shared the story with everyone in my inner circle. I vented about how frustrating and unfair the situation was, how I couldn't believe this had happened to me. I cried over losing my car, over the hassle of replacing it. I ranted about how the other driver was trying to gaslight me into believing I had run a red light. I scoffed when my insurance called back, telling me the other party was insisting I was at fault. There were multiple phone calls with my insurance company. Every time they reassured me that based on the damage there was almost no way the other side could prove I was to blame. After all, I had already been nearly through the intersection when they hit me. My agent sounded just as baffled as I was, surprised by how aggressively the other insurance company was pushing back. I thanked her for fighting for me, relieved that the facts were on my side. Then, once my claim was settled, I used the check to buy a new car and moved on. The accident was behind me. At least, that's what I thought, until today. My phone rang. It was my insurance agent. Her tone was different this time, serious, hesitant. "There's really no easy way to say this," she began, "but we were able to retrieve dashcam footage from another vehicle at the scene. It very clearly shows your car running the red light." A long, suffocating silence. What? That wasn't possible. There had to be a mistake. When she sent me the video, I fully expected some grainy, misleading footage, something that had been taken at a weird angle, something I could dispute. Instead, in crystal clear 4K resolution, I watched my own car blow straight through a red light. The next half hour was a complete collapse of my reality. It's impossible to describe the sheer gut-wrenching feeling of realizing your memory of a life-altering event is entirely false. I had been so sure. I had known I was in the right. And yet, there was undeniable proof that I had been catastrophically wrong. This case is a clear proof of how deceptive our memory can be. Sometimes we are so sure we are right that we don't even think we are wrong until we are confronted with irrefutable evidence. The story isn't just about breaking the rules. It's about self-confidence, which can play tricks on us. The author wasn't drunk, wasn't distracted by his phone, wasn't racing at high speed. He was just tired, and that was enough for his brain to fake an entire episode. This once again proves that not only experience is important on the road, but also sober attention, including to one's own condition. But the main thing here is awareness. The author could have stood his ground to the last, denying the obvious, looking for loopholes. Instead, he admitted his mistake, realized its seriousness, and drew the right conclusions. This is that rare situation when a fuck-up turns into a powerful lesson not only for him, but for everyone who reads this story. So let this be a reminder to everyone. Before you get behind the wheel, make sure your mind is as clear as the road in front of you. Sometimes it's not just alcohol that can turn you into a danger on the road. Ordinary fatigue can do the same.